guys, welcome back to Food Prep Guide. We have just wrapped up our first ever rabbit processing day here on the property, and we are ready to get it all into shelf-stable format and fill our pantry with the animals that we have raised. I wanted to bring you along for the canning process. Now, before we get started, I wanted to talk to you about what you will see in this video and what you will not see in this video so you can decide if it's for you. I understand raising rabbits for me is not everybody's cup of tea, totally get that. So what you will not see in this video is you will not see any of the actual butchering process. These rabbits are already clean and ready to cook, or can in this sense. So if you were to go into Walmart and buy a whole chicken, you're going to see the shape of that chicken, but it's all clean and ready for you to cook. That's what you're going to see in this video. You will see the shape of the rabbit, but it is all cleaned and ready to cook. So if seeing that shape would bother you, maybe this isn't the video for you. But if you are interested, what we are going to do is can it up 3 different ways. I'm going to show you all 3 methods. One is going to be pre-cooking it a little bit first and doing like a shredded chicken type thing. Rabbit and chicken is like synonymous in my mind. People have asked me before, how do you plan on cooking with it? How are you going to be using it in meals? Well, it is simply chicken in my mind. It tastes just like chicken. It cooks up like chicken. And if you were to take a stranger off the street and blindfold them test, they probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference between rabbit and chicken. So if I want chicken tacos, I can use a can of rabbit. If I'm doing a chicken casserole, I can grab a pint jar of rabbit instead. So that's how, just throwing that out there. So we're going to do it that way. And then I'm going to show you how to turn all of the bones and the bits into broth that we will be using for all of our cooking recipes. And then I want to show you how to actually quarter up the rabbit and can it bone in. So where all you have to do is make a few cuts, put the rabbit in the jar and can it up that way. It's a very, very simple way to get shelf-stable meat is by just canning it bone in. You don't even have to peel it away from the bones, don't even have to do any cooking first. It is a very efficient way to get food up on the shelves as quickly as possible. So if that interests you, I'm excited to bring you along and show you the process. Let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to Food Prep Guide. My name is Jordan. I'm a homeschooling mom to 3, living on 3 beautiful acres with my wonderful husband. A health crisis forced our family to change the way we think about food. Unfortunately, it also put us in financial hardship. Thankfully, the solution to both challenges was the same: to live off the land as much as possible. For us, that means growing a garden, preserving the harvest, raising chickens, and cooking from scratch. It's definitely a family affair. And friends, too. Meet Stacy, researcher, author, and lifelong learner. She entered the world of food preservation in the crazy days of 2020. She joined a gleaning co-op and a local grocer offered her clearance produce in bulk. And so the adventure began. Together, we're reclaiming the old ways of food stewardship and teaching them to the next generation. If there's one thing you should know about us, it's that we love Jesus and seek to steward his blessings wisely. Our table always has room for one more, so y'all come join us. We're going to start out by cooking it as if it was shredded chicken, which means you pre-cook it. Typically, you want to cook it until it's about 80% of the way cooked. I went a little further than that. It's pretty much fully cooked at this point, but that's okay. I like to do it in my countertop roaster oven. That's how I do large batch of cooking for canning projects. But once it is either 80% of the way or all the way, it's okay. You're ready to go ahead and start shredding it up. I started out using a fork and quickly realized that it would be a lot more efficient if I just got in there with my fingers, but I wanted to show you close up what it looks like. It looks just like chicken and it tastes very, very, very similar to chicken. But there's nothing fancy to do here. We are simply just removing the meat from the bones at this point, remembering that we are keeping those bones in order to make bone broth later on. But if you just get in there with your fingers, it's a whole lot easier to pull off. I've got a separate bowl for what you see on camera is for the meat that we will use for canning. What you don't see off camera is that I have a larger bowl that I will be putting the bones in for canning up later on. But this process actually goes really quickly. So you want to go ahead and set up your canner, get it ready. Meat is low acid, which means it has to be pressure canned. I'm going ahead and heating my lids. I use 4 jars lids, and those still do really well being heated. Ball and cur lids, you might not want to heat those. They're a lot more cheaply made these days, and I find that heating them results in a lower seal rate. You can season this however you want. I like to keep it simple with just a half a teaspoon in pint jars. If it's a quart jar, I would go a full teaspoon. But I just wanted to show you in here, I went ahead and dumped all of the meat back into the roaster oven, and we will come back to that in just a minute and show you how to season it to be making some bone broth. But at this point, you just fill your jars up to 1-inch headspace. There's nothing fancy about it. When it comes to canning meat, you see that I'm using my tongs here to kind of push it down, but I'm not packing it down. There's the 1-inch headspace right there, right at the top of that, where the lip meets the jar. But you can see that I'm kind of pushing it down a little bit so that the meat settles down, but I'm not taking my tongs and absolutely stomping it down. That's just kind of the sweet spot with canning, that we want enough to where there's not a lot of pockets of air, which could give us a lower quality product, but we don't want to pack it down so much that we are creating a potential heat distribution issue. So once you have it into 1-inch headspace, remember this is pre-cooked, and so we do need to add liquid. If you are used to only raw packing meat, you know that you don't add liquid because the meat will create its own liquid during the canning process. That's not so with already pre-cooked meat. So you just want to take your broth that was produced from the cooking process and use that to top off your jars again to 1-inch headspace. You can use your debubble tool. I wasn't really debubbling at this point. I was just trying to get it down to see if I had enough liquid to reach 1-inch headspace, and you can see that I do. And that's all you do. If you find that you are running out of broth when you're from the cooking process, you can absolutely top it off with water. You just get more flavor if you use the broth that you actually produced during the cooking process, but you can absolutely top it off with water if you like. So once all of our jars are filled, we just do the typical pre-canning steps, which is wipe the rims really good. Anything that's greasy like meat or really sugary like jams and jellies you really want to pay a lot closer attention with wiping your rims. So I made sure I did a good job there. And then just place your lids on and then your rings to fingertip tight and then into the canner that they go. If you have a Presto digital pressure canner, it is literally just push button. We have a video on that on the channel for walking you through that, so I will link that down below. I believe it's canning shredded chicken. This is the All-American canner, and you can safely double stack in this canner. I'm using pints. You can't double stack quarts, but for pints and half pints, you can absolutely double stack. So we are going to be canning these. Remember, these are without bones, and they are in pint jars. So we are going to be canning these for 75 minutes. But remember that you don't start your time until you reach pressure. And as you can see here, I reach pressure for pints, 75 minutes at 10 pounds of pressure. Be sure to check and see if you need to adjust that for your elevation. For reference, I live below 1,000 feet elevation. Okay, moving on. So here's how it looks coming out of the jars. If you've ever canned chicken, it looks just like this, and it's because it's very similar. So let's move on and make some broth. At this point, I'm just going to top it off with water. You do not need to measure. You just need to submerge all of your bones in water. I don't have a particular measurement of water for you because I never measure. Just make sure they're all good and submerged. At this point, you can add any kind of vegetables you want, really, that do well in broth, like carrots, onions, things like that. You wouldn't want to do things like potatoes, but I almost always add onions. And then I always do a tablespoon of turmeric powder. It gives it a beautiful color, a really nice flavor, and the nutrients that's in there. And then a little bit of pepper. Not only does the pepper help season it, I do half a tablespoon for this large batch, by the way, but it also helps to kind of make the turmeric work even better. And then I do a full tablespoon of salt. So to that big countertop roaster oven, we have 1 tablespoon salt, 1 tablespoon turmeric powder, half a tablespoon of pepper. And then we're just going to go ahead and let that cook on low. The temperature kind of depends on how quickly you want yours done. I typically let mine hang out at 225 degrees Fahrenheit, either overnight while I'm sleeping, or if I get started early in the day, I will let it go on all day, and it'll be the last thing I can up at the end of the day. But if you've ever made broth before, it's the same steps. You just need to separate your solids from your liquids. I have done this so many different ways over the years, and I have settled into using basically a strainer basket that has a long handle and larger holes. I find the really small holes get they just catch too much stuff. And we're going to do a second filtering, as you'll see here in just a minute. But for the first phase, I find that a large strainer basket with a good handle with larger size holes does the job pretty well. So I mentioned a second stage of filtration, and that's where the cheesecloth comes in. I put it over the jar and then use a little, sometimes I use a little tea strainer, sometimes I just use the cheesecloth as you see here with a filter on top, and I usually use a mug to scoop it out, and it does a good job of filtering out any of those little bits that were left behind through the strainer basket. Some people are very, very nitpicky about how much solids is left in their bone broth. You just don't want too many solids in there. But if you pull them out of canner and you see a couple little floaties in there, don't freak out. That is totally fine. If there's this teeny tiny little chunks of meat throughout there, it's okay. But when you use a cheesecloth like this, it does get clogged up pretty easily. So you'll want to scoop out whatever is getting caught in there and then continue on with your process, and you just do that for all of the jars. I do can all of my broth in quart jars because that's pretty much what it takes for a meal, or 1 quart jar can typically stretch for 2 meals. Typical pre-canning steps: wipe your rims. I don't typically debubble with broth because it's just straight liquid. In order to debubble, I just lightly shake the jars. The bubbles rise to the top, and we're good to go. So put on your new clean lids, put on your rings to fingertip tight, and we are ready to can. Again, this is a low acid product, so it does need to be pressure canned. And it is not safe to double stack quart jars, at least not in my model. I do believe there is an all-American model that is safe to double stack, but not this one. So we need to pressure can quarts for 25 minutes at 10 pounds of pressure. Adjust for your elevation if needed. Remember, I am below 1,000 feet for reference. So after the time is up, after we let our canner come down to pressure and let it cool, here's how it looks. You can see it's not still boiling inside that jar. That is an indicator that you've got good solid seal. A lot of times if you pull a jar out of the canner and it is not bubbling, that means your seal is going to fail or it has already failed. Just a little tidbit for you. Okay, so we're going to move on to the bone-in canning process. Now in this part, I want to, for those of you who are interested, if you're not interested, please feel free to skip past this part, but I want to show you how to part out a rabbit. We start with the front legs. You pinch the skin kind of around that rib cage that you just saw me do, and then you follow the joint of the shoulder, and it detaches very, very easily, and that's your first part of your meat. Here I am pinching around the rib cage so I can get in between the rib cage and the joint. Use the knife to follow around that front shoulder, and it comes out very easily, as you can see here, and there's our second piece. So now we're going to move on to the hind legs, and you can see that the rabbit has a natural line there, and we're just going to follow that line with our knife. And basically what we're doing is following that line until you hit the ball joint of the hip. And then you're going to flip it over and do the same thing on the other side. Now, the other side is a little bit harder because there's not that nice little guideline for us, but it's still pretty easy. You're just cutting until you hit that ball joint and moving around to the other side. And you're basically just wanting to get that ball joint nice and loose. Don't try to cut through it. There's just no reason to put your knife through that. No reason to put your muscles through that. It's a lot easier to break off. Once it's free moving like this, you can flip it over, put your thumb right underneath that ball joint for leverage, and just rip it right off. It's a whole lot easier than trying to cut it. So same thing on the other side. I'm going to go a little bit quicker, but use that knife to follow along the groove, hit that ball joint, use leverage to pop it right off. And there we have our second piece, or fourth piece at this point. So now we're going to trim off the stomach flaps. I don't really know what they're called, but it's just these little flaps that kind of go along the rib cage that held all the organs in at one point. You can feel with your fingers where the rib cage ends, and you want to cut right where that rib cage ends, and then you just slice right down the side of it all the way to the back, and it comes off in one piece. Some people actually don't like to eat this part. It kind of has a different type of texture. When I am cooking it fresh, I don't really like to eat it. But when I am canning it, the pressure canning process does a really good job of tenderizing it, and making it taste and feel like any of the other parts of meat. So for canning, I do use them. So now we're going to be working on the back strap. So again, you want to feel for where the ribs end, and we're going to cut right up under that last rib at a slanted angle until we reach the spine, and then do one short little cut right on top of the spine. Flip it over, do the same thing. Find the rib cage, cut at an angle, and meet your cut right there at the backbone, and do just a short little cut across. You're not attempting to cut through the spine. We're going to use leverage just like we did with the hip bones, and pop it right off. It's a lot easier. And there is the back strap. We are going to need to cut off, by the way, this is the rib cage. We don't use that for canning. That's going to go into our pot for another batch of broth. So we do need to cut off the back hip bone, basically. That's the hip bone that I'm pointing at right there. It's rounded. You want to get your knife right up under that hip bone. It usually slides in there pretty good. Again, we're going at an angle until we hit the spine, flipping it over, doing the same thing on the other side, hitting it at an angle, meeting at the spine. Then we're going to use our thumb as leverage, and just like we did with the hip point, we'll just pop that right off. I want to show you what the back strap part looks like. This is like the prized cut of the meat, pretty much on any animal. It's the same with the rabbit. Very nice. Okay, so now the hip bone goes into our bone box pot for broth, and we're ready to load our jar. So when you are canning bone in, it's the same for any meat, whatever you're doing, but you are just trying to, it's kind of like Tetris. It reminds me of Tetris. You're trying to fit them together to where there's as little air pockets in the jar as possible. And sometimes this means having to take a piece out and swap it out for another piece and see if that part fits better. That's what it reminds me of Tetris. But we are going to basically 1 inch headspace. Some people do 1 1/4 inch headspace, but I will say that when you are canning bone in, it can be difficult to get the entire part of the bone below that 1 inch headspace line. And I wanted to point out that that's okay. If most of your actual meat part is at the 1 inch headspace, it's okay for a little piece of bone, a piece of a leg, a piece of an arm to be sticking up above that 1 inch headspace. That's okay. That is not an issue. I mentioned before that when we are canning bone in, we do not add water. And since this is, when we are raw packing, which typically when you can bone in, you are raw packing. You don't put any kind of water or broth on top. You do kind of need to debubble, but it's very difficult to debubble bone-in meat because you've already packed it in really well. If you did a good job with playing Tetris, you've got it packed in there really well, but we're just sliding it on the sides of the jars and trying to make those pieces of meat kind of settle into any cracks and crevices that may be in that jar. Remember, we're not adding water, so there's no point in trying to debubble in the traditional sense. We're just trying to but that's it. You can season it however you want. I typically don't season, or I will only use salt, and I do a teaspoon per quart jar. I didn't season it this batch at all. So new clean lids and rings to fingertip tight and ready to go. It is meat, again, low acid, so we're going to be pressure canning. And since this is bone in and in quart jars, we need to pressure can them for 75 minutes at 10 pounds of pressure. That is in quart jars, and that is bone in. You may notice that the bone in has a shorter canning time than if you don't have bones in it. The bones actually help to spread and disperse the heat, distribute the heat, and that's why it can can for a shorter amount of time. So here's how they look coming out of the canner. Here's all those bubbles, which is a sign of a good solid seal. And we'll be waiting 24 hours for these to completely cool and settle, and then we will be putting them up on our shelves, using them in all sorts of recipes. I hope that was helpful to y'all. That's all for today, and we will see you next time. Bye.